Oh, YouTube, Mr. Gibson guy here today. I'm bringing you a desktop video. I've never done one of these before, but I've seen some people do it. So I'm set up to go and see how this works out. We're not in the garage today. Back in my man cave room here. Today I'm going to be talking to you about the title of this video is the GCA and the PPK. There's a lot of talk of gun control going on right now, and I've been around guns for a long time. And I've been studying up on contemporary historical accounts of some gun control, and now I'm going to compare that with what are my own personal experiences from those days. The Gun Control Act of 1968 came out when I was 15 years old. I was a shooting enthusiast back then, as I am now, but I kept up surprisingly much. That was an important subject to me, so I watched the news and I was watching closely what was going on, and now I like contrasting my memories of what happened with what we read about what happened. So let me, without further ado, go into this my story of this video, okay? Alright, Gun Control Act is a law. What does a law mean? Talking about federal laws, because it's a federal law here. It comes from Congress, signed by the President. A law is applying the full force of the federal government to deprive one party of something while allowing another party to encroach on the practice of the first party, which are being limited. Okay? That's really what a law is. It's taking what somebody wants and making it into something backed by the government. We say you have to do it. Now, of course, in order for the government to be at all effective at this, they have to write laws in such a way that leaves the enforcement of something that they have the capability of doing. People talk about, I've seen a lot of this now, about wanting to outlaw and confiscate guns. But to be practical, the federal government has no way to do that. In the Gun Control Act of '68, how they addressed it was as a matter of interstate commerce. That means if something is made in a state and sold in a state and bought in that state, that's something within the state, and the federal government has no jurisdiction over it. But if something is made in states and then sold and transferred to other states, then it's interstate commerce, and the government has the authority to control that. So they can say, this is okay, this no. And that's how they face this GCA with their enforcement mechanism, was under interstate commerce. They can restrict who gets to build something, who gets to distribute it, who gets to dole it out, and the ability of who gets to buy it. We'll get to that a little bit, a couple paragraphs down here too. So here's how they start out with their explanation. This is from Wikipedia. This is their explanation, and then we'll look at what really happened after that. Buying guns by mail was halted because the government couldn't control who could buy a gun. Alright, so they're saying interstate commerce. This came because people could buy a gun in the mail, and this was something that government had controls over because it was interstate commerce. Now, oh, yeah, and this was the important point. The government can't control it if it's by mail. What does that say about voting by mail? Can't control that either, can we? So if it was a bad idea for guns, isn't it just equally a bad idea for voting? Or somehow it's different? No, it's not. All right, now, according to Snopes, this is how the bill came about. The Gun Control Act of 1968. You'll notice when this starts here. The bill was initially prompted by the assassination of U.S. President John F. Kennedy in 1963, 5 years earlier. The president was shot and killed with a rifle purchased by mail order from an ad in the magazine American Rifleman. Congressional hearings followed and a ban on mail order gun sales was discussed, but no law was passed until 1968, 5 years later. At the hearings, NRA Executive Vice President Franklin Orth supported a ban on mail order sales, stating, quote, "We do not think that any sane American who calls himself an American can object to placing into this bill the instrument which killed the President of the United States," end quote. All right, so they're looking at it in terms of this is something they control, interstate commerce, so they can take action and actually limit it. Well, let's see what happened in those 5 ensuing years that this emergency was going on. April 4th, 1968, assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., shortly followed by the June 5th assassination of Robert F. Kennedy, President Kennedy's younger brother, compounded by shifting societal attitudes towards gun ownership, renewed efforts to pass the bill. On June 11, 1968, a tie vote in the House Judiciary Committee halted the bill's passage. We'll look at this a little bit later, too. On reconsidering 9 days later, the bill was passed by the committee. The Senate Judiciary Committee similarly brought the bill to a temporary halt, but as in the House, it was passed on reconsideration after they put the right stuff in it. House Resolution 17735, known as the Gun Control Act, was signed into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson on October 22, 1968, 2 weeks before the presidential election, where he was not running for re-election, banning mail order sales of rifles and shotguns and prohibiting, this is important, most felons, drug users, and people found mentally incompetent from buying guns. Now, notice this is dealing with not allowing guns to be sold by mail and having to go through approved, licensed gun dealers. But all of a sudden, this is still in the same article by Wikipedia, and this is talking about prohibited persons, and it takes place years later. Okay? Remember, governments can do things which are within their capabilities of controlling. Prohibited persons, we just read above, sale of rifles and shotguns and prohibiting most felons, drug users, and people found mentally incompetent from buying guns. Now, next paragraph, still the same 1968 Gun Control Act. The Gun Control Act of 1968 was amended in 1993, it's a lot later, by the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act, which introduced a background check requirement of prospective gun purchasers by licensed sellers and created a list of categories of individuals whom the sale of firearms is prohibited. All right, 2 things. One is, this is where they start the background check requirement. 93. Remember, in 68, we really didn't have computers. 93, we have computers, so we have some sort of way to get to this, or eventually we will. So this is coming within the grasp of the government to check people closer. And then, it shall be unlawful for any person to sell or otherwise dispose of any firearm or ammunition to any person known or having reasonable cause to believe that such a person 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, A, B, A, 6, 7, 8, A, B, I, 9, within the following, this goes on and on and on and on and on. All of the people, now they couldn't do this in 1968, but by 1993 they were starting to get to the point where, ooh, maybe we can check up on everybody. So they just kind of tie that in to the law from 1968. That's kind of funky, I think. But anyway, that was how they come up with prohibited persons in the Brady Bill Amendment. All right, now let's contrast what we've been told with what gets left out today in the same subject. Okay? When the government steps in to restrict or infringe on your constitutional rights, they generally justify it by pointing out how magnanimous they are, how the government is stepping in to protect you from dangers that you need government protection from. They're not taking away their rights, they're protecting you. There has to be a villain, there has to be a bad guy. And the government is stepping in to protect you from that bad guy, from that villain. And in the case of the GCA 68, the villain was the dreaded Saturday Night Special. Now if I say Saturday Night Special on YouTube, people are thinking about, oh, well, yeah, I watch Saturday Night Special videos. I saw like BTO the other night, or The Who. No, that's not the Saturday Night Special. At that time, a Saturday Night Special was a cheap, very poorly made, imported handgun, which was a piece of junk made out of zinc that was going to blow up in your face and harm people, and didn't really exist except in the propaganda that had been pumped out during those years in the 60s. And people who knew nothing about guns, never touched guns, never knew anything about guns, never had anything to do with guns, were very upset because they were convinced that if they went somewhere, some Saturday Night Special was going to blow up in their face and harm them or kill them or take their children away. Even though it didn't really exist. It was a straw man, just invented because they had to have fear. It was global warming. It was assault rifles that just go out and shoot innocent children on their own. No, it's just a made-up thing. And people had fear about that. And that's how they drum up the reason, the justification. People are afraid of these. We've got to ban Saturday Night Specials. I'm going to do another video on this other subject, but Ted Kennedy and his dumb cop killer bullets, which were only supposed to be used by cops. But he called them cop killer bullets, and we had to do away with outlaw these bullets. And it was all based on a complete, total fabrication. That's another one. But that's the Saturday Night Specials. Sure, I know there's like the Jennings 22, which kind of piece of crap. Pull the trigger, probably gonna jam if it fires at all. But the Saturday Night Specials weren't. That's just what they do. All right, but that's for fear. Now, let's look at what was really going on. In the real world, see, this is how bills go 5 years from starting in 63 and being signed in 68, because everybody has to get on board. everybody has to put down their money. Everybody has to back it, and everybody has to, let's do this. No, let's do this. No, let's do this. I paid the most money, we're doing this. And that's how laws are made. Oh, thank goodness for the days we have gridlock and laws can't be made. In the real world, Smith & Wesson and Colt, two big handgun manufacturers in the United States, had cornered the market for firearms, expensive, well-made, professional firearms for law enforcement, like a Model 27, 357 Magnum, for, well, it's been a while now, but this was back in the 60s, and this is what cops carried back then. It's before Dirty Harry, too. And not only that, in addition to the full-size service guns, Colt and Smith & Wesson also sold hideaway guns, concealed guns. Like this Model 36. For plainclothes officers and for uniforms to wear on their ankle, on an ankle holster for backup guns. And while an officer might go years with his same service revolver, cops were going through, they're always looking for a new hideaway gun. So Smith & Wesson and Colt sold lots of those. Colt had marketed the Detective Special, their little 2-inch 38 special, since the 1930s. Smith & Wesson followed up with the Chief Special in 1950. But in the 1960s, something unexpected happened. A make-believe British Secret Service agent entered the public consciousness, that's the word, carrying a Walther PPK, not a Smith & Wesson, not a Colt, but another concealed carry gun. James Bond's gun was new and exotic in the American market. Colt and Smith & Wesson did not appreciate a German gun horning in on their concealed carry gun market. So the gun makers came up with a scheme to ban the importation of the PPK. Let's switch over here to another accounting here. We're not in Wikipedia anymore. In the United States, this is the full explanation here of what got left out in the other one. In the United States, the Gun Control Act of 1968, GCA, was enacted as a federal law aimed at regulating the firearm industry and firearm owners by restricting interstate commerce in firearms. The transfer of guns could only be done by federally licensed manufacturers, dealers, and importers. There were also limits placed on imported firearms coming into the United States based on certain criteria, which we will not explain. Under the GCA legislation written by legislators, but criteria written by gun manufacturers. A pistol intended for import had to earn a minimum number, this is so lame, minimum number of points for various sporting features, and the PPK failed to qualify. Size, weight, and magazine capacity issues. This is really funny. Magazine capacity issues resulted in the GCA prohibiting the PPK from being imported. It was an ounce too light and carried too few rounds in the magazine to satisfy import restrictions. Now that's a really fun one if you've been keeping up with what's been going on with gun control. Presently, they're talking about magazines that are hold too many rounds. But the PPK was outlawed by the federal government because the magazine held too few rounds. Just to show you what hypocrites these fools are. There we go, how's that? Was that a fun one? We continue because the big thing here is we get gun control laws, but look at what comes in the long term from these laws. They always defeat themselves. In order to continue PPK sales, oh, let me hold off on that. After my own little personal note here, after being banned, the PPK was highly sought after and prices skyrocketed. Following the demand, Walther licensed production to the US. Now I read the rest. In order to continue PPK sales in the United States, Walther overcame the restrictions by developing the PPK-S, which teamed the frame of the Walther PP, their full-size police pistol, with the slide and barrel of the PPK, Police Pistol Criminale, or the real PPK. The added 1.8 ounces of weight and 0.2 of an inch in height and additional round, we go to 7 rounds in the magazine, which met the import requirements. We had to have a bigger magazine to be legal in the US. Not a smaller magazine, a bigger magazine. That is so funny. Huh. Make up your minds there, lawmakers. It is presumed, allowed the PPK-S to be legally imported. It is presumed that the S added to the PPK designation stands for sporting, which was the intention of the restrictions. That is incorrect. The PPK-S, the S stands for Stetsis, meaning that it was the PPK model designed to be exported to the United States. That's why the S. German-made PPK pistols were imported. Here's what happened. First, Walther takes the PPK and elongates the frame, puts in another round, makes it the PPK-S, so we can get German PPKs just with an extra round in the chamber, in this magazine. Then, German-made PPK-S pistols were imported and distributed by Interarms in Alexandria, Virginia. But the first one manufactured in the United States was in 1978. Now we've gone from 68 to 78, and 10 years later, we are now making PPKs in Gadsden, Alabama, and it was also distributed by Interarms. Let's take a break here so I can show you here. This is, well, let's go here. See if you can read this. That is from Walther, and on the flip side, we see it's from Interarms, Alexandria, Virginia. It was also distributed by Interarms in 1998. This is where things get really crossed up. In 1998, Walther's U.S. manufacturing and distribution licenses were transferred to Smith and Wesson. They start building Walther PPKs. Smith & Wesson assembly plant in Holton, Maine, where the lighter PPK was made, which was not allowed to be imported, but could be manufactured here, was made for the American market. During that time, due largely to the popularity of the Bond films, it's James Bond again, 80% of the PPK and PPK-S pistols made were sold in the United States. That's the gun that Smith & Wesson and Colt originally wanted to get rid of. And then Smith & Wesson ended up making them, ironically enough. But guess what else happened? And this isn't just an addition to the story as well as the Gun Control Act. In late 2012, Walther Arms retook control of its U.S. operations, locating its headquarters and assembly facility in Fort Smith, Arkansas. So they've gone from Alabama to Maine to Arkansas. Today, the PPK and the PPKS are both manufactured in 380 ACP, or 9mm short, as a standard chamberlain. Originally, it was 32 ACP. Assembled at the Fort Smith facility, the PPK and PPKS designs remain faithful to the original manufactured in Germany. They feature integrated front and rear sights, a decocking safety, and smooth double-action, single-action, hammer-fired trigger system. Initially, the US-made PPK and PPKS is offered in stainless, but black finishes as well as several special edition projects are planned for the future. And here's Walther's quote. Walther Arms is justifiably proud of this series, describing the PPK as nothing less than legendary. Once in a great while, a firearm is so popular that it becomes a cultural icon. The PPK established a defining influence on the design of concealed carry firearms. Its elegant lines and precision engineering have a timeless appeal, and a PPK has the solid feel of lots of steel. Said Brett Voorhees, no, it says pure quality, Director of Production Development at Walther Arms. Having the PPK and PPKS made by Walther for the first time in a long time, this is a cut at Smith & Wesson, allows us to have much better control over the quality of the pistol. Voorhees said, "We are pleased to offer a higher quality product than what was previously available when Smith & Wesson was making them, which we feel the iconic PPK product line truly deserves. Produced for nearly 90 years, the PPK's success as a military and police-issued duty firearm is firmly established, earning it respect and praise from every corner of the world. As a PPK owner since the 1980s, I'm a big fan of the little pistols features that make it a reliable defensive gun." All right, that's enough of that. So, what do we have? Let's sum it up with this. So while it was Ian Fleming, the creator of James Bond, who brought attention to the PPK in America, it was the Gun Control Act of '68 that was originally designed to destroy the PPK that ended up making the gun an American-made icon. So, when you make gun laws, you never know what's going to happen. And I want to thank you for sticking with this to the end. Hope this was insightful, learning some things about the unintended consequences and how things will be careful what you wish for, because you might get it, or maybe not. Anyway, this is Mr. Gibson Guy. This has gone on long enough, and I'll talk to you later.